send us a hello. Let us know where you currently are. And Bas would also like to give a great big thank you to Web Radio Fraternidade and Kardec Radio for also sharing this live event, and to all the other groups around the world who are also sharing this event via their Facebook pages. Now let's tell you a little bit more about our guest. So Arun Gandhi was born in Durban, South Africa, during the rising of racial tensions that led to the legislation of apartheid. At the age of 12, Arun was taken to India to meet his grandfather, as we can see here in this wonderful photo, his grandfather being Mohandas K. Gandhi. And there he had the opportunity to live with him and learn from him about how to transform negative feelings to acts of goodness, the lessons of non-violence. Arun later became a journalist and reporter for the Times of India and moved to the United States of America. Like his grandfather, Arun is an author and has continued to work with the ideals of charity and non-violence. And here we have just a few of Arun's wonderful books, including The Gift or Gift of Anger and Grandfather Gandhi and Be the Change, two wonderful children's books. Arun is also the co-founder of the MK Gandhi Institute for Nonviolence, founder of the Gandhi Worldwide Education Institute, and also set up Avani Center in Kolhapur in the state of Maharashtra, India, which itself has been posthumously dedicated to Arun's wife, Sunanda. Arun has also worked around the world speaking and giving lectures at various places about his experiences and insights, and has also been a board member of the Parliament of World Religions and the Interfaith Council, as well as co-founding and still being chair of the Season of Nonviolence. Now, there is a lot more that we could talk about our illustrious guest today, but it's always best to let the guests themselves speak. So I'd now like to hand you over to Arun for his talk about the lessons of Mahatma Gandhi for our daily lives. Arun, hello there, how are you?
Hello, thank you, I'm fine.
Okay, and now over to you for your talk.
Well, friends, it's wonderful to be with all of you today and to share with you some of the lessons and of the philosophy of nonviolence that I learned from my parents and my grandparents. I was, as you were told in the introduction, I went to him at the age of 12 and lived with him for about 2 years. And during those 2 years, he taught me some very valuable lessons that didn't make a lot of sense to me at that time. But as I grew up and began to reflect on them, I realized how important they were and how they were connected with his philosophy of nonviolence. Now, as you said, as you were told in the introduction, I was born and brought up in South Africa at a time when there was a lot of prejudice and hate in South Africa. It seemed to me at that age that everybody hated everybody for some reason or the other. Either the color was not right or the religion was not right or whatever it was. We just hated people. And that is what really transformed my grandfather. Because when he came to South Africa in late 1890s, and he became a victim of color prejudice and was thrown off the train. That was the first time he experienced hate. I mean, he knew that there was a lot of hate and prejudice going on everywhere, but when he experienced it himself, that was the point at which he transformed and realized that something needs to be done about this. And that is where the philosophy of nonviolence was born. And as he began to work on it and progress with it and protest in South Africa against the apartheid laws, he realized that it was not just hate in one particular region or just confined to race or color, but it was hate that was all pervasive. It covered everything in human being. And that brought him to the conclusion that we had created a whole culture of violence, a culture that is so deeply rooted in us that everything about us has become violent. Our language is violent, our sports have become violent, our entertainment is violent, our religion is violent. Everything about us is based in violence. And that is why it's becoming so much more difficult to create peace in the world. And he said the only solution for this whole problem is something alternate to violence, and that is non-violence. And although a lot of people tell me that non-violence is a negative concept, it is non-violence. There is a hyphen in the word that makes it different. I think that non-violence is not negative at all, because to practice non-violence, we have to bring out all the good in us, all the respect and understanding and acceptance and compassion, and all of these good qualities in human beings have to come to the fore so that we can be truly non-violent and practice it effectively. But to be violent, we have to bring out all the worst in us, all the hate and prejudice and anger and frustrations. So I think nonviolence is much more positive in that sense. And so going back to when I went to him, and the very first lesson that he taught me was, excuse me, was to learn about anger. He said, anger is a wonderful emotion. It is a very powerful emotion. But the tragedy is that we all end up abusing it because nobody has ever talked about it, or nobody teaches about anger, and we have to find our own ways of dealing with it. And unfortunately, all of us have just learned to abuse anger. And that is what causes much of the violence and problems in the world, as well as in our own personal lives. So he said that anger is like electricity. It's just as powerful and just as useful, but only if we use it intelligently. But it can be just as deadly and destructive if we abuse it. So just as we channel electrical energy and bring it into our lives and use it for the good of humanity, we must learn to channel anger in the same way so that we can use it intelligently for the good of humanity rather than abuse it and cause death and destruction. He suggested that I write an anger journal. He said, every time you get angry, don't act on it, don't say anything or do anything that is going to make you regret what you did. But write a journal. But write the journal with the intention of finding a solution to the problem, and then commit yourself to finding a solution. Now, that is very important. Because today, a lot of people tell me that they have been writing an anger journal for a long time, but it hasn't really helped them. Because what they do is they just pour their anger out into the journal. So every time they go back and read the journal, they're just reminded of the incident and they get angry all over again. So we don't want a journal to remind us of the incident. We want the journal to help us find a solution to the problem. I did this for many years, and I must say it helped me considerably in learning how to channel the energy of anger into constructive action rather than abusive action. For that, he said, you've got to also have control over your mind. You know, when right now, because we have not done anything to strengthen our mind, we do a lot of physical exercises because we want a strong body. We go to schools and educate ourselves because we want lots of knowledge. But we don't do any exercise that strengthens the mind. And that is why we find that our mind is never under our control. That although we think that we control the mind, but we'll find that at any given moment, there are about a dozen different thoughts racing through our mind as we are trying to concentrate on one thing. And that is an indication that the mind is not under our control. So we need, just as we need to do physical exercises, we need to do mental exercises. And he asked me to do a simple thing, to sit quietly in a room for a few minutes every day, hold in front of me something that gives me pleasure to look at. It could be a flower, or it could be a photograph of somebody, or whatever it is, just keep that in front of me. For 1 minute, I had to concentrate on that object, full concentration on that, and then close my eyes and see how long I could hold that image in my mind. In the beginning, I found that the moment I closed my eyes, the image vanished. But when I began to do this exercise regularly every day, I found that I could keep that image longer and longer in my mind. And to that extent, my mind was coming under my control. So it's important for us to have control over the mind so that when we encounter an incident where anger is a possibility, we can stop ourselves from doing something that we would regret later on. And that, I think, is a very important thing for all of us to learn and to practice every day. The other very important lesson that he taught me was about violence. Today we look at violence only in terms of the physical aspects of it, the wars and the killings and beatings and things that happen every day in our lives, and we see it and are affected by it. He said that the only way we can understand nonviolence is by first understanding the extent and breadth of the philosophy of the violence itself. And to make me understand this and to realize how much it is part of our lives, he made me draw a genealogical tree of violence. Just as we do a family tree, he made me make this genealogical tree of violence. Every day before I went to bed, I had to add on to that tree all the things that I had experienced during the day. The tree was had two branches. One was physical violence, the other was passive violence. And physical violence is something that we see every day, we experience every day. It's all the physical manifestation of violence, where physical force is used. But passive violence is something that we sometimes don't even know that it is violent, and we commit it every day. Things like discrimination or wasting resources or over consuming resources, um, because we can afford it, we do all of these things. All of that constitute violence, passive violence. And when I began to do this exercise every day, it was a form of introspection. When I began to do this introspection every day, I realized that within a few months, I was able to fill up a whole wall in my room with acts of passive violence. The physical violence didn't grow very much because there's a limit to what one can do physically, uh, to other people. But the passive violence side just grew endlessly. And then he explained to me the connection between the two. He said we commit passive violence every day, consciously and unconsciously, and that generates anger in the victim, and the victim then resorts to physical violence to get justice. So it is passive violence that fuels the fire of physical violence. So logically, if we want to put out that fire of physical violence, we have to cut off the fuel supply. And since the fuel supply comes from each one of us, we have to be the change we wish to see in the world. If we don't change our attitudes and our behavior and change from the culture of violence to a culture of non-violence, then we will never be able to change this world. Then we will continue to fight and kill and destroy, and eventually we will destroy all of humankind. So these are some important aspects that we all need to remember. And, unfortunately today, everybody looks at the philosophy of nonviolence as just another tool to use in a conflict. It's not another tool. It is something that we have to make a part of our being, a part of our lives, and the way we live with each other. It's also something that is very important in our building of relationships. Today, our relationships with each other are built on self-interest. We are always thinking about what am I going to gain from this relationship? And if I don't gain anything from it, why should I bother to cultivate a relationship? And the result is that as long as we are getting something out of somebody, we maintain a relationship. But the moment we stop getting anything from the person, then we break off the relationship. And every time we break a relationship, we are creating a potential for conflict. And that's how conflict multiplies in society. In philosophy of nonviolence, relationships are built on four principles: respect, understanding, acceptance, and appreciation. We have to respect ourselves and respect each other and respect our connection with all of creation. Now, that is very important because today a lot of people think that we are independent individuals and we can do whatever we like and it's nobody's business. We are not independent individuals. We are interdependent, interconnected, and interrelated, not only with each other, but with all of creation. So it's only when we respect that we will understand who we are and what we are and why are we here on earth. Now, we are not here by accident. We are here for a purpose. And at the very least, our purpose is to make this world a little better than we had found it. Now, if each one of us can do that, then this world will change and we will change and we will create peace in the world. Now, so, and then once we understand that, then we will accept each other as human beings and not identify people by the labels we have put upon each other. Today, we have so many labels to identify people that we have forgotten that behind those labels there is a human being. So we've got to remove all those labels and just begin to look at each other as human beings and respect each other as human beings. And it's when we are able to do that, then we will appreciate our own humanity. So these are the four principles on which ideal relationships are built in a philosophy of nonviolence. And that leads to a better understanding between people and eventually peace. Now, our idea of peace today also is very faulty. We think that the absence of war is peace, that if we are not fighting with anybody, we are living in peace. But we are not living in peace because we are committing a lot of passive violence towards each other and towards nature and towards all of humanity. So peace really means harmony, creating harmony in society where we can all live in harmony with each other. And that is what we should strive for, not just the absence of war, but creating that harmony in society. And that harmony in society can come about only when we are able to understand the philosophy of nonviolence and practice it in our lives every day. So these are some very important lessons that I learned from my parents and grandparents. And of course, there are many more that I can talk about for hours together, but I think this is the nutshell of everything. And if we begin to practice these lessons, we will take a major step towards creating peace and harmony in the world. So I want to, sorry, I want to finally share with you one story that my grandfather used to be very fond of telling us. It was the story of an ancient Indian king. Who once became very curious about the meaning of peace. And he invited all the intellectuals in his kingdom to come and explain the meaning of peace. Everybody did their best, but nobody could convince the king. And one day there was an intellectual from another town who came on a visit and asked the king. The king asked him, what is the meaning of peace? And this intellectual said, there's only one person who can give you an answer to this. And he is very old. He lives outside your kingdom. You will have to go to him and ask him this question. So the next day, the king went to this man and asked him the question. And he silently went into the kitchen, came back with a grain of wheat, and placed that grain of wheat on the king's palm and said, "Here is your answer." And of course, the king didn't know what a grain of wheat had to do with peace. And he didn't want to show his ignorance. So he quietly clutched that grain of wheat and went back to his palace, found a little gold box, and he placed that grain of wheat in the box. And every morning he would get up and look in that box to see if he could find an answer. And of course, he couldn't find any answers. So a few days later, when this intellectual came back on a return visit, the king asked him to explain. He said, "You sent me to this sage. He gave me this grain of wheat, and I don't know what a grain of wheat has to do with peace." And that is when the intellectual said, "It's very simple." He said, "As long as you keep this grain of wheat in this gold box, nothing is going to happen. It will rot and perish, and that will be the end of the story. But if you plant this grain of wheat in the soil and let it interact with all the elements, it would sprout and grow, and very soon you could have a whole field of wheat." And that is the meaning of peace. That if somebody has found peace and if they keep it locked up in their hearts for their own personal gains, it will perish with them. But if they let it interact with all the elements, it would sprout and grow, and very soon we could have a whole world of peacemakers. So I have taken this opportunity today to give you the grain of wheat that I got from my grandparents and parents. And I hope that you won't let it rot and perish, but let it interact so that all of us together can make this world a better place for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those wonderful insights and lessons. And I know that you've talked about various other things as well, such as the story about the little pencil,
Mhm.
which is a wonderful story as well. Um, but I've made so many notes right now of everything that you've mentioned. Um, of course, the lack of violence does not always equal peace, and this idea of the genealogical tree of non-violence, I think that's such a wonderful aspect for us to be able to visualize how we are, how we act, and how we react.
Yes,
So,
it's very revealing. I would suggest everybody do that personally for their own benefit as a family project. Get the whole family involved in how are we all contributing to violence in society. I think it would be a wonderful lesson for the children to learn, also to practice that.
yeah, absolutely. And so we do have a few questions coming in for you. And again, anyone who's watching and anyone here within Zoom as well, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat if you're on Zoom, or in the comments if you're on Facebook. And so there's one item that you mentioned about the overuse of resources being passive violence. So what do you think? What do you think of, and what would you think your venerable grandfather would think of modern society with the excess of information, of products, of disposable technology, the environmental damage that we've been going through?
He would be very unhappy with that. He believed that the world has enough for everybody's need, but not for everybody's greed. And what we are doing today is we have become so greedy that we don't think about anybody else as far as we can get, a big share of the pie, uh, as in the individuals as well as nations. That is our entire objective. And that is why, we have so many conflicts there, because we have created a society, or and created an atmosphere, a relationship between people that is based on exploitation. We exploit each other for what we want. Nations exploit each other for what they want. And so when you have exploitation going on such a massive scale, it's going to create a lot of unhappiness and eventually lead to violence there. So we have to understand that no nation in the world, however rich and powerful it may be, no nation can be secure and safe in their own little place and not worry about the rest of the world. The stability and security of any nation depends on the stability and security of the whole world. If we can't ensure stability and security throughout the world to everybody, then we are not going to live in peace and stability too.
Yeah, I think everyone would completely agree with that. So following on from that, our next question is how can how can non-violence help us regarding disagreements, whether they're between people, employees, organizations, or nations, to enable to regain the harmony of society that you mentioned?
Well, I think all the conflicts that we have individually and collectively have their roots in exploitation, in materialism, in selfishness. We are all trying to grab things for ourselves and exploit people to make them work for as little money as we can pay them. And that is where, we bring about all this misunderstanding and the problems that we face today. So if we have a good relationship where we are fair and willing to pay people proper wages and ensure that they have all the um, benefits that they need, uh, we can create harmony. And there are so many businesses all over the world. I have come across several of them who are practicing this, where the people employed are so happy that they don't want to leave them and go elsewhere. They are very happy in the job because they get everything that possibly can be given to them. They have all the benefits and things, and so they are very happy. So there are examples of how this can be done in every aspect of society. But it's that greed and selfishness that drives us. And so, we are always looking at how can we make bigger profits by giving people less benefits.
Yeah. And I suppose it doesn't always necessarily help when people sometimes don't want to look and acknowledge and accept that they may be greedy and selfish.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they think they are smart, that they are able to make so much money, but it's not that smartness, it's that greed that enables them.
Yeah. And right, we now have two questions which are quite similar to each other. So a lot of people have been suffering anxiety recently through the various things that have happened. And but at the same time, lots of people have been promoting the need for mindfulness to calm the mind, to meditate. What advice do you have about for people who may be with anxiety or having difficulty to actually be still, to be quiet, to be able to meditate?
Well, I think we need to get at the root of the anxiety. We can't just learn mindfulness and meditation and try to push it in the background. We've got to face these issues. So, where is the anxiety coming from, and what is the reason behind it? And how can we eliminate that so that we don't suffer anxiety all the time? It's very important for us to face it and deal with it, openly, rather than find ways of obscuring it and pushing it in the background.
Yeah. And again, looking at the ideas that you mentioned about respect, understanding, acceptance, appreciation, I think we have to always try to apply that to ourselves so that we can
Yes,
appreciate ourselves, both our strengths and our weaknesses.
exactly. And that is what my grandfather also, when I lived with him, he said that every morning I had to get up and tell myself, I'm going to be a better person today than I was yesterday. And then I had to make an effort to be a better person. And that's how we grow and become better. We are not better because we have a university degree or a college degree. We are better when we make that effort to get rid of all the weaknesses and the issues that we have in our life, and and become better that way. So, along with education, we have to work on ourselves to identify all the weaknesses and shortcomings and change them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, related to what you mentioned just now, and thinking about general peace and world betterment, how can we instigate, how can we plant that grain of wheat of peace within young children?
We have to do it through example. We can't tell people or tell children to do something that they see that we are not doing ourselves. Many times we try to use our authority as parents to make children do things, and yet they see us doing something quite contrary. So it is only through example that the children will learn. There's a very good example of what I'm saying. There was, Gandhi had an ashram, and many people came to live in the ashram and be part of the non-violent community. So from the ashram, one day, young mother, brought her child to grandfather and asked grandfather to please explain to the child why he should not eat so much sugar. The doctor apparently had told the child that he should cut down on sugar, and the child didn't obey the doctor or the parents. And so grandfather told the mother, you come back after 15 days and I will speak to him. And she didn't know why she had to go back and why couldn't grandfather speak to the child at that moment. But she went and came back, and after 15 days, grandfather took the child aside and spoke to him in his ears quietly. And the child gave up sugar, didn't eat sugar anymore. So the mother came back to grandfather and said, "What kind of miracle did you perform? That we've been trying to tell him all this time and he wouldn't listen to us. And yet you murmured something in his ears one day and he absolutely obeys you." And grandfather said, "It wasn't a miracle." He said, "The reason I asked you to come back after 15 days was I had to give up eating sugar before I asked him to. And all I said to the child is that I've given up eating sugar. Will you give up and join me also?" And that the parents didn't do. They were using their authority. The doctor said, "You're not going to get sugar, so you're not going to get it, but we are going to eat." And so the child didn't obey.
That's a wonderful story. But exactly, we have to be the example that we want others to follow.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we have just a few more questions. Again, we have two more which are quite similar to each other. So thinking about non-violence and thinking about how things have changed over the past 100 years or so, do you think that humankind has actually evolved with regards to its morality and its social values? Do you think that we have overcome many of the issues that your grandfather faced?
No, I think we have exasperated many issues. In fact, the grandfather used to say that materialism and morality have an inverse relationship. When one increases, the other decreases. And we see today that the whole world has become materialistic and they're willing to do anything to achieve the goal of getting more money. So morality, therefore, is at the lowest ebb right now. And that also leads to all the other uh, connected issues that come up in our lives. So I don't think that if we have progressed after grandfather's time, it's only in material things. We have, um, all kinds of equipments and computers and that kind of material progress we have made. But there is no moral progress at all.
Yeah. And can you personally see any parallels between the apartheid that you have witnessed and the Black Lives Matter movement that we've witnessed recently?
Oh, yeah, there are many parallels, and this is getting worse in every society. We hate somebody or the other for some reason or the other. We just can't, learn to live with diversity or appreciate diversity. And that is because we are so selfish and self-centered, and we don't want to acknowledge this. And so the problem here in the United States, as far as the Black Lives Matter is concerned, is that the white Americans don't want to acknowledge and accept the fact that they have oppressed these Black people for so many years, that they enslaved them. And so as long as they live in that denial, that we were not the people who did it, it was our ancestors, and it should be buried with them. You don't bury problems with them because you are doing the same thing in different ways right now. You may not enslave them, but you hate them. You give them less opportunities. You deny them equal, equal status, and so it's the same thing. It's just you've changed the outward appearance of it.
Yeah. It's a shame that that's the state of humanity at the moment. But I'm sure that we can finally one day, hopefully, we can start to learn about it. Well, it's only been 4,500 years since we've had it written down, love your neighbor as yourself. So maybe one day we'll start to be able to learn and apply that.
Yes, I think we just have to work harder to do that. But like I said, as long as we don't acknowledge that as being our weakness, we will not do anything about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's only when we acknowledge that this is something that, and it's, I won't say it's just confined to the whites. It's, it affects everybody. Brown people are just as prejudiced. Black people are just as prejudiced in different ways. So we all have to look at that and change that attitude that we have.
Yeah. Okay, so just two last questions. So with this unusual pandemic that we've been going through, we've most of us have been isolated, we've had very little social contact. And given that we sometimes have to appreciate the situation that we are in, what lessons do you think we can learn from this current situation?
I think one thing we need to learn is the importance of discipline. We have no discipline at all. Like I said, we are all independent individuals, and we'll say, to hell with the scientists. We won't wear a mask. It's my freedom. I won't wear a mask to go out, and I won't do this, and I won't do that, and we still have parties, and we still go on with life. Well, then you pay the price for it. And that's what is happening today. We can't control the pandemic because so many people uh, abuse their privilege and go on doing things that medical science tells us not to do.
Yeah.
So we need that discipline, and we need to realize that our actions affect other people as much as their actions affect us. So that interrelatedness and interconnectedness is very evident in this whole episode itself.
Yeah. And I've just written that down. Our actions affect others just as theirs affect us.
Mm.
Okay, and now the last question, and we've actually had 3 or 4 people ask exactly the same question. If you can give any story or memory from your grandfather that's touched you and affected you in any way, which is something that stays with you all the time.
I think the three stories that I shared with you today are the most important things, and they really have made a big difference in my life. And I'm sure that if other people practice it, it'll make a difference in their lives too. Learning how to control anger and use it intelligently, learning about the depth and breadth of violence in our societies and what can be done to eradicate it, and by learning how to build relationships that are based on respect and understanding and acceptance rather than selfishness.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much for all those wonderful insights. And we're sorry that we were not able to get to everyone else's questions. But before we finish, I'd like to ask if you'd be willing to talk a bit more about the Avani Center, uh, about what it does, what it means to you, the importance to the local community. And I have a few slides that might be helpful for that as well.
Yeah, sure. And, there's tremendous amount of poverty all over the world. And we tend to ignore the poverty and try to bypass it. And it's especially aggravating in countries like India, where you can see poverty every day of your life right next to you and nobody does anything about it. So I was very happy to come in touch with Anuradha Bhosle, who's a very dedicated social worker, and she was trying to set up programs to save children from being exploited, and especially children from poverty who were exploited not only sexually but also for economic reasons. They were made to work at a very early age and they were paid very little, and not given opportunity to get any education. So she was rescuing these children, but then she didn't know what to do because she didn't have the funding and things. So that's where I came in and provided funding and made it possible for her to build a shelter where we can house these people, feed them, take care of them, and give them education. So that is the program that is going on at the moment. Uh, we have we have about 60 girls in the shelter that we have, where they stay and live and go to school and learn. And then we have uh, little classrooms in all the slums in and around Kolhapur, where nearly 1,000 children come and get some kind of education. And we are very glad that many of the students of Kolhapur University have dedicated themselves to come after their classes to teach these children and give them some education. And so, these are the programs we are doing with minimal funds. I don't have very many, uh, I don't have much of my own funds. Whatever I do earn, I give to them. And but it's a little step in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all of us can appreciate that kind of work. And this is why, on behalf of BUS, we'd like to offer our support to Avani. And so, for anyone who'd like to give their support, please send your donations via BUS, the British Union of Spiritist Societies. The details are currently on screen for anyone who's watching. Please make sure that you use the reference Gandhi to ensure that the funds get directed the correct way. And every little helps. Every little helps. I know that many people watching have witnessed and seen similar kinds of situations in different countries. Many people from Brazil and have seen or worked in the slums in Brazil. I personally have as well. And so I know that every little bit of help makes such a big difference. So
Yes, it does.
hopefully we can get some wonderful, generous people to maybe give a small amount here and there, maybe, so we can get a great fund to be able to send over to help the work at Avani.
Thank you very much. That will be greatly appreciated, not only by me, but by all the children that will benefit from it.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. And so there's just one more thing. There's one closing thing which I don't know if you'd be able to do for us. There is a certain poem that your
Oh,
grandfather
yes.
enjoyed rather well, um, which for me I always find it quite inspirational, especially the version that he specifically liked. Would you be able to read that for us?
Yes. I'll sing a part of it for you if you don't mind.
That would be wonderful.
I've done a little change in that, Um, when grandfather wrote this, he mentioned Ishwar Allah Tero Naam Sabko Sanmati De Bhagwan. Now, Ishwar and Bhagwan are Hindu terms for God. And so it was basically meant for Hindus and Muslims joining, bringing unity between them. But today, I think also other religions have to be considered too. And so I modified, instead of Ishwar, I say Ishu, which is again an Indian term for Christ. So Ishu and Allah, so including the three major religions of the world. So the poem is Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sita Ram Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sita Ram Sita Ram Sita Ram Bhaj Pyare Tu Sita Ram Sita Ram Sita Ram Bhaj Pyare Tu Sita Ram Ishwar Allah Tero Ram Sabko Sanmati De Bhagavan Ishu और अल्लाह तेरो नाम सबको सन्मति दे भगवान.
Thank you so much. And just to give the translation of the last part of this poem, it's please give peace and brotherhood to everyone, as we are all your children. We all request that this eternal wisdom and of humankind prevail. So thank you very much for your time with us today, Arun Gandhi. It was a wonderful set of lessons. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience. I'm looking at the comments, and many people have been touched by all of this. And again, we'd like to give our thanks to, let me just bring my screen up. I'm so sorry for this short delay. Give our thanks once more to the British Union of Spiritist Societies for organising this event. Our thanks for Web Radio Fraternidade, Kardec Radio, and all the other groups who've been sharing this live. For everyone who's had a chance to comment, we've got many people watching from all around the world, from Lithuania, from Brazil, from Ireland, from all around the UK. For everyone who sent their questions, and we hope that everyone can stay safe and stay well. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you.